Hi all, I'd like to show you the shortest decisive encounter recorded between Robert James Fischer, Bobby Fischer, and Boris Spassky. Now this is from the 1992 match, which we've had a look recently at a few games, and there's still one or two more interesting games I'd like to present at least. So here Fischer playing white kicked off with e4, and we saw e5 from Boris, and now after knight f3, knight c6, the Roy Lopez, bishop b5, Spassky plays a6, and now a little surprise is played here by Fischer. Bishop takes c6 is played. The normal bishop a4 dominates this position, but the exchange Roy Lopez, okay, it gives black the bishop pair, it damages black's structure, so it creates some imbalances. Black takes with a d pawn. Okay, in this position, white, let's put on a Kibitzer. White cannot really take on e5 to expect an advantage because of queen d3, in case some of you don't know this. So this is a perfectly playable variation. White castles here usually, and that's what's played. Now f6 supporting the e5 pawn, and Fischer immediately plays now d4. After e takes d4, the most popular move is knight takes d4, not queen takes d4. And that is what's played. Knight takes d4. So the queens are not coming off immediately, but now, in fact, black has the option to play c5, and this is the most popular move here, to play c5 and get the queens off. The knight goes back to b3, and now the queens come off. And you might think it's a little bit dry, isn't this? What can white get in terms of an advantage here? Well, the double pawns is a long-term thing for white, maybe in the endgame to target to get his majority here. If you look at the majority of pawns on this side of the board, it's free here, so pawn majority in the endgame could be useful. That's one thing. In the middle game, are these pawns actually targets? Let's say bishop g4 is played by Boris. I think this is actually the most standard move. If we just check live book on this position, bishop g4 is the most popular move, and second most popular is bishop d7, but by far the most popular move, bishop g4. So encouraging either the rook to move or f3. f3 now, bishop e6. And now a slight deviation here. The most popular move by far is bishop f4 to target c7 here. Another idea is bishop e3 just to target c5, but Fischer chooses a much rarer idea, a move knight c3. So it's keeping the tension. Where is this bishop going to be moving? Either to e3 or f4, keeping Boris Spassky guessing. Well, Boris stops now bishop f4 by playing bishop d6 in advance. And so we see bishop e3 targeting the c5 pawn. How does black actually react to this without losing control of the d4 square? If black plays the move c4, this would not be pleasant, surely. White has, for example, knight c5 actually here to try and get the two bishops from black and still retain structural advantage. This will be quite pleasant for white. So the pawn is actually just protected in this position. Maybe bishop takes b3 again is unappealing from giving up, the bishop pair. So b6, but the downside of b6 is that this pawn chain can be undermined from its base. Base being b6 potentially. Fischer plays now a4. However, perhaps it is actually playable to play a5 because this rook's liberating by default on its default square. Perhaps Boris could have considered a5, giving up the b5 square, and although this looks horrible, this bishop on d6 as a sitting target, if for example castling queenside, rook d2 to build up pressure on d6, knight e7 say, rook ad1, this isn't all bad for black. Okay, there are some problems. I mean, if bishop e5, then actually taking and knight a7 is end of game, winning the rook on d8. So black would have to be careful, but there's a fantastic resource here for black in bishop d7, just targeting a4 pawn. And this should actually be, from an engine point of view at least, quite okay, this kind of position here. So in fact it seems that the move a5 was potentially a viable response here, because this pawn is actually fixed as a target. In fact, there was a game in the 1972 match where Fischer playing black did target Spassky's a4 pawn. I think it was in an Alekhine defense game. So it's interesting that a5 wasn't played, and now in fact we see casting queenside by Boris Spassky, allowing this a5. So the problem noted before, this rook's gaining scope and it's already threatening to take, and then a6. So the king comes to defend a6, king b7. And now, though, this might not be the most accurate. Let's just check this position. Although it looks very damaging for AB, black might have time to play bishop takes b3 here, c takes, and now actually b5 might actually have been playable as well. So this would make sure this rook hasn't got scope, it's not attacking a6. This isn't such an exploitable weakness. c5 is quite difficult to get to, perhaps. Okay, it looks about equal, so that was another opportunity here for the very forcing move bishop takes b3 and b5 to have been played. But no, what we see from Boris is king b7. Maybe just expecting AB, but then maybe trying to eventually play knight e7 and share the a file. But there's quite an unexpected move and a very powerful move from Fischer played in this position. I wonder if you can guess it, or you might want to pause the video here. If I give you 10 seconds starting now, what would you play with the white pieces? Okay, Fischer plays the very energetic e5. It's actually a square vacating move. It's vacating the e4 square for the knight. Of course, this bishop's pinned now because of that king leaving, a weakness of the last move. This is a loose piece on d8, so the bishop can't take here without losing the rook. But the bishop drops back. Now, in the game, the bishop dropped back, but let's have a quick look. If f takes e, for example, the idea is something like this. A takes, and with c5 as a target, taking back seems one of the better ideas. Knight e4, though, attacks the bishop, and this is a difficult position for black, indeed, with this threat of knight takes d6. Very difficult position here. If bishop c7, we see that one of the recurring ideas is knight e takes c5, exploiting the loose bishop on e6. Pardon me, forking the king and the loose bishop on e6. So this is pretty nasty stuff. So that's the principal kind of fork idea. But what else can black have tried in this position if he had gone for f takes e? There isn't too much else. If king c7, it looks bad for either rook takes a6, or there might even be a stronger move, bishop g5 here. And this is very, very difficult for black, this kind of position. So that kind of unpleasantness, is showing the power of this vacating, like sacrifice to vacate the e4 square. But instead, perhaps wisely, Spassky plays one of the best moves, bishop e7, keeping things intact for the moment. And now, if white does try bishop takes c5, this just doesn't work here. Black, well, is protecting c5 adequately in any case. It's not working at all, in fact. So things out of danger for the moment. But rook takes d8 was played. And now black takes with the bishop. Knight e4 now is threatening knight takes c5. There's enough pieces on c5 for that to be a threat. But it's here that Spassky apparently went into deep calculation of a very long variation, apparently with bishop d5 in this position. So he was looking at bishop d5. I think it's very important to try and get some empathy. So this is one of the things he said about this game, and he couldn't find an advantage for white, but switched at the last minute to a different move. I think Alexander Kotov, the great writer of Think Like a Grandmaster, mentioned this as a recurring issue for some players, that they're analysing variations and at the last minute they ditch their variations and choose a completely different move that they didn't really check at all. I think it's one characteristic trait of the different move they didn't analyse at all is often weakness of the last move. And instead of playing, okay, let's have a quick look though. If bishop d5 had been played, maybe this is the kind of variation which would need to be calculated. A takes, C takes, allowing knight d6 is scary, because now there's a potential for knight f7 if the bishop wasn't covering it. So we have to analyse things like c4 here, but there's also the dangerous knight takes c5 first. If bishop takes, and if bishop b6, there's knight c8 check. So king b8, and now c4. So all of this, I guess, has to be analysed. Bishop can't step away from f7 here without allowing knight f7. And this kind of position is actually quite scary for black. Even though black's a piece up, the engines actually like white quite a bit here. A very dangerous position, for example, like this. It's some way down, but maybe it's giving some empathy for the kind of stuff which needed to be calculated here. So there's quite dangerous threats like bishop d6. If bishop takes c4, check, and this is unpleasant, winning the bishop there. And if king b7, then coordination gets a mate in two, quite horrifically. So it's quite dangerous for black's king, and this stuff needs to be calculated from bishop d5 to be proven. But at the last minute, in fact, bishop d5 perhaps was Spassky changed his mind and played this move, adventurous king c6. These kind of king moves often helped Tigran Petrosian defend very tricky positions and confuse opponents, playing very unexpected king moves, king walking around board. But here, this is not so convincing, because now Fischer just plays A takes b6, and there's a big snag which is revealed in relation to this a6 pawn, and again this loose piece here. This is a big problem, this position. We've got a loose piece on e6. If black doesn't want to consider the automatic recapture, but rather bishop takes b3, then white is not obliged here to do the automatic c takes b, but in fact can do what seems to be a very promising move, threatening to queen here, b7. If king takes, can win another pawn, knight takes c5, and this looks quite bad indeed for black, winning lots of material like this. So it looks as though bishop takes b3 is completely ruled out after this a takes b6, which leaves c takes b, and now we see the tactic knight b takes c5. So we have this tactical idea to win the e6 bishop, and you might not be convinced about that. Well, let's have a look. B takes c5, which wasn't played. Let's have a look at this. Rook takes a6. Now if king d5, this is very dangerous here. Two moves offer a big advantage for white. A simple one is just check, and rook takes d8, pinning the knight, and black's in real big trouble here. There's two connected passed pawns, horrendous congestion and pin there of that knight. So this isn't very nice at all. Also, another move for white is bishop f4 here, which might even be stronger technically, threatening kind of mating combination with knight c3. For example, if black tried a natural move to get out, check. Well, this is just horrendous, even if it's not mating. So basically, black has to give up, well, not take this pawn, and Boris actually plays bishop c8. It's a pretty bad position. Now he loses the a6 pawn to the knight. Now f takes e5 was played. It's a very bad position. Knight b4 check. The king is being kicked around, and all of these pieces, look how aggressive they are, and look how passive black's pieces are. In this position, white is, okay, just one pawn up, but Spassky thought his position was so bad, he resigned. So let's investigate why in this final position. Well, let's see. King d7, for example, we can play check. King c7, we can play rook d6 here, ganging up on the poor b6 pawn. What does black actually do here? So say knight f6, bishop takes, king b8. This is not very nice, just losing a piece. Horrendous. So this knight b4, what does black actually want to do? If king c7, then rook a7 check is a nasty check. And in fact, after bishop b7, there's a horrendous tactic available to white here, exploiting, in fact, that the rook hasn't developed, the knight's still there. What would you play if I gave you 10 seconds in this position to wipe out black tactically? Okay, white has a tactic exploiting black's lag development to take on b7 and then play knight d6 check and then knight f7 winning that rook. So winning material, being a piece up. So if we go back to knight b4, we're running out of alternatives here. Let's try king b5. Here this actually runs into, believe it or not, a cute mate in 3. Whatever black does, mate in 3. I wonder if you can visualize the mate in 3. Well, there's different ways of doing the mate in 3. I'll start you off actually. Knight d6 check. How many options for black? Not many. The king's been sucked down the board. And now, can you see a move which would finish the mating net, ready for the mating move? So you're preparing a simple mating move here. There's a beautifully elegant move here to finish black off for a forced mating 2. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, white would have rook a3 with the horrible threat of c3 mating, and you know the king just cannot go anywhere. All of its squares are cut off. c3, the rook covers b3, so c3 is just going to be mate. All the squares will be cut off, including that b3 after rook a3. This is just forcing mate. So you see that in this final position, all of these king moves seem fairly hopeless. We've had a look at king c7, I think king d7, king b5. Have we looked at king b7? Let's have a look at king b7. There's simply check, and here we can just play knight f7, winning the rook. So okay, the game had just 1 or 2 blunders really from Spassky, but that was enough to really get a crushing position. So it was from an exchange royal Lopez, quite an interesting weapon of choice to use against Boris Spassky in this game 9 of this 1992 match. I hope you enjoyed that. So here, I think here black had resigned. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.